Okay, so today is June 27th, 2020, and we can begin with the homage to the Buddha. So if you have a Buddha statue in front of you, you could do a salutation to it. If not, you can just imagine the Buddha before you, and we recite the verse of homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So good morning again to everybody, and welcome to our Saturday morning Dhamma study class. And so we are continuing now to read the Anguttara Nikaya. This is the book of the numerical discourses of the Buddha. And we've been going through the chapter of the fours. And now, as I'm skipping around and taking the more interesting suttas, we're passing to sutta number 49. The theme of this sutta is the four, here it's translated as inversions. And let me get a blank file so we could write the Pali down. Yeah, the word that's translated as inversions in Pali is Vipallasa. And this word comes from two prefixes, V plus pari, plus there's a verb asceti. I think it has a double S. Asceti, which means to throw. And so the V gives a sense of opposite, pari, the sense of around, and asceti is to throw. So this is throwing around so that something winds up upside down. So it's from vipari asceti. I think it's one S actually. We would get first pariyasa, vipariyasa. But what happens in Pali, this is the way I think it would appear. What happens in Pali is this combination of R-I-Y, to make it easy to pronounce, gets turned into a double L. So it's Vipallasa, the Pali term is Vipallasa. And the Chinese translators have a fixed rendering for this. The rendering they use is, I'm not sure about the tones, Dian Dao, which means literally upside down. So these are four kinds of, we call these upside down ways of thinking, or inside out ways of thinking. So getting everything all mixed up. We could see from the sutta, we begin with reading the sutta, that the Buddha opens the sutta by declaring that there are four inversions, and these four inversions operate at three levels. There is a level of perception, the level of mind, and the level of view. So in Pali, we would have Sanya Vipallasa, Chitta Vipallasa, and Ditti Vipallasa. So these inversions or distortions, as I said, they operate at 3 levels. And we might see in these 3 levels a sequence going from the subtlest to the grossest, from the most, let's say, the most spontaneous and automatic to the most elaborate and most deliberative. So we start off with the distortion or inversion operating almost at the pre-conscious level, at the level of perception, the way we see things, the way we spontaneously and naturally perceive things is already infected by these distortions, these inversions. Then because we perceive things in a distorted way, in an inverted way, in a way contrary to reality, then we pick up our perceptions and then we start reflecting upon them, thinking about them. And so in this way, this distortion and inversion infects the mind, particularly the mind's, the citta, the way we think, reflect, and interpret our experience. And then because of that distorted, inverted thinking and reflection and interpretation, we grasp upon views, perspectives, ways of constructing our world, ways of interpreting our experience that maintain and even solidify and strengthen these distortions, these inversions. So we pass from distorted perceptions to distorted ways of thinking and reflecting to distorted views and opinions and doctrines and conceptual elaborations. That is at the level of views. And the way I would look at these distortions, I see that these are ways in which ignorance, the fundamental ignorance, takes on a more positive manifestation. So in the Pali canonical text, ignorance is almost always defined as a negative. So ignorance is not knowing and seeing things as they really are. And so not knowing the Four Noble Truths, not knowing the 3 marks of existence, not knowing dependent origination, not knowing the arising and passing away of things. So this is the way we usually find ignorance defined in the suttas, as a negation. There's always the emphasis is on this not knowing, not seeing. But when there is this lack of knowledge, this lack of insight into the real nature of things, then ignorance doesn't remain just as sheer negation, as the sheer absence of knowledge, but it starts to infiltrate, to invade, and to colonize, to affect, to have an impact on our perception, our thinking, and our views. And so these distortions or inversions of perception, inversions of the mind or thinking, the inversion of views, or we might say the positive manifestation of ignorance. And of course, other defilements, when there's ignorance often, out of ignorance, other defilements arise. So out of ignorance or delusion, there arises lust, hatred, conceit, and many other defilements. And so all of these infect our perception, our thinking, and our views. So we could say that the distortions or inversions of perception, of thinking, and of views are perception, thinking, and views that have been that are conditioned by ignorance or delusion, and that have been infiltrated and invaded by the other defilements. And now the Buddha enumerates 4 particular inversions which operate. Each of these operates at the 3 levels. And so this is what we find in the sutta. So we have the inversion of perception, the inversion of mind or thinking, the inversion of view that takes the impermanent to be permanent, the inversion of perception, mind, and view that takes, here I'll have to use the Pali word, that takes what is really dukkha to be pleasurable, to be a source of happiness and enjoyment. Then there's the inversion of perception, mind, and view that takes what is not a self to be the self, to be what I really am, to take what is not my identity as my true identity. And then there's the inversion of perception, mind, and view that takes what is really not attractive, not beautiful, not lovely, not pure, to be attractive, beautiful, lovely, enticing, or pure. So those are the 4 objects, or let us say the 4 modes in which these 3 kinds of distortions or inversions operate. So if we take the 3, let's say the 3 types of inversion in relation to the 4 modes or domains of the inversion, then we get 12 inversions altogether. Okay, let us look at each of these distortions or inversions in a little more detail. So here I'll express them simply as taking. So taking the impermanent.
The Zoom virtual background is available for your meetings, webinars, and your Zoom rooms. It's supported on Windows, Mac, Linux, and iOS devices. To get started, log into your web portal at zoom.us. Once you're logged in, navigate to your settings on the left-hand menu.
Yeah, please, everybody should mute their microphones. Okay, we're going to take these now at a finer level, more detailed level. So we begin with the first, taking the impermanent to be permanent. Well, first, before I take them at a more finer, more detailed level, first what I want to say is that even though 4 inversions are enumerated here, I would divide these 4 inversions into 2 broad categories by way of the topic. I would separate off the first 3 and put these into one category. And then I would put the last one into a different category. And the reason why I make that distinction is because these first three inversions apply to all conditioned phenomena. And these, let us say the correct counterparts of these three inversions, that is impermanence, dukkha, and non-self, apply to all conditioned phenomena. That all conditioned phenomena are really impermanent, really dukkha or unsatisfactory, and really not a self. But the fourth inversion applies not to all conditioned phenomena, at least according to the exposition in the Buddha's teaching, but it applies specifically to the body. And it is not actually a mark of things as they really are, but this characteristic of the non-beautiful or the unattractive is, I call this an expedient way of discerning, perceiving the body for a specific purpose, for the specific purpose of overcoming sensual lust, or more specifically, sexual desire. And I think this will become clear as we go through them. So first, let us take the mistake of taking the impermanent to be permanent. So what the Buddha teaches again and again, he says, all conditioned things are impermanent. Sabbe sankhara. Sabbe sankhara anicca. All conditioned things are impermanent. And we could see this truth of impermanence at different levels. What's interesting is that it applies, we can move from the macro level, the broadest, most general level, down to the micro level, the most minute, the finest, the subtlest level of phenomena. So taking the mark of impermanence at the broadest level, we might take maybe the world as a whole, the universe as a whole. So we take this particular universe to be something that is in some way permanent. So even though the planets will disappear, we will disappear, but we take the particular world system in which we're living to be permanent. But the Buddha teaches that even a world system passes through different stages. So the world system has the stage of arising, the stage of stabilization, the stage of decline, and then the stage of disintegration. So this would be like the arising of the Milky Way. Then the Milky Way, when it takes shape, gradually it expands till it reaches a maximum point of expansion. Then it starts to deteriorate and decay, and then eventually it disintegrates. And if you go to YouTube, you can put into the search box, black hole. And there are some videos that I saw over the past couple of weeks which show how when a black hole forms, it starts sucking into it. What a black hole is, it's a point, a microscopic point in which the gravitational force is so strong that it sucks in everything that comes into its range. So even light cannot escape from the black hole, which is why it's perceived as a mass of blackness. So that black hole begins sucking in all of the remains of the star out of which it was formed. And then if anything else comes close to that black hole, some other star comes close to it, that black hole will just pull that star apart and tear that star into, I don't know, it just tears it apart limb by limb and sucks that entire star through that microscopic hole of the black hole. And what happens to the star when it passes through the black hole, nobody knows. So this is the way in which stars disintegrate and disappear. And in time, this galaxy, the Milky Way, will disappear. And even this world system, which consists of countless galaxies, that will disintegrate and disappear. So that is the widest level, the broadest level. But even as we come down to smaller levels, our sun in time, we speak about the sun as being everlasting or eternal, but after so many, perhaps millions of years or billions of years, the sun will exhaust its fuel. It will explode and swallow up. It will explode and send its debris throughout the entire solar system. Then it will contract upon itself and suck in all of the remains of the solar system. So even the sun and the solar system are impermanent. Then at still finer levels, we can see our own life subject to impermanence. So we have birth or conception, we come into being, then we gradually develop, there comes growth, maybe from the day of birth or the day of conception, there's gradual growth till we reach the peak at maybe middle 20s, late 20s. Then there comes a gradual decline as we enter, enter our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Then there's old age, and then everything ends in death. And then coming to a final level, so the lifespan, we could say maybe full lifespan, let us just say 80 years, 85 years for a good lifespan. But then each year, we could see we have the springtime, summer, autumn, and winter. And that gets followed by a new spring, etc. So we could see impermanence operating at the level of the season. And with each season, we could see the changes, say, in the vegetation around us. So it's springtime, the trees send out their buds and their blossoms, the flowers start to blossom. During the summer, where we are now, the trees are full of the green leaves. In autumn, the leaves turn orange and red and yellow. And then in late autumn, they turn brown and fall from the trees. Then in winter, the trees are barren until again they arise. In spring, the trees start to sprout again. So those are some of the more obvious forms of impermanence. But then we could see impermanence, and this is the level with which the Buddha's teaching is particularly concerned, impermanence in the 5 aggregates. So this is material form, feeling, and so forth. So in regard to the 5 aggregates, we see that these 5 aggregates are subject to constant arising and passing away. So that is, you could say, the mark of impermanence. What is the mark of impermanence? According to the works like the Visuddhimagga or the Pali commentaries, it's being subject to arising and passing away. Upada vaya or udaya vaya, arising and passing. So each of these 5 aggregates, form, feeling, perception, the volitional activities, consciousness, it has an arising. After it arises, it might stand for a brief moment, and even while it stands, it undergoes what is called anyatatta. It undergoes otherwiseness, change or transformation, and then it passes away and vanishes. So when we look very closely, very deeply into the physical body, we see not only that the body, when we're young, it's strong and healthy. When we get older, it becomes weaker and feeble. When we die, it turns into a corpse. But even from moment to moment, the body, the phenomena of the body, the material phenomena of the body are arising, standing for a brief moment in which they're undergoing change, and then vanishing, undergoing dissolution, bhanga, breakup, and vanishing. So material form arises, stands, and vanishes. And we could see this. One of the ways, I mentioned this a few weeks ago, but I'll repeat it, in which we could see impermanence in physical form is in the act of walking. When we do the walking meditation becomes a very, very powerful means for gaining the insight into impermanence. So we have a step, and at the coarsest level, we have right step, left step. So we're walking back and forth, attending to each step, right step, left step, right step, left step. Now, if we use our wisdom to identify the step, we can see that when we're taking the right step, there is no left step. And when we're taking the left step, the right step has ended. So each step has its period of existence. And when we take the next step, that previous step has ended. It's gone the way of impermanence. So in the succession of right steps and left steps, we could already see at one level the sign or mark of impermanence. Right follows left, left follows right, and when one is occurring, the other has to have stopped to end it. But we could take this investigation further and look into each step and see that in one step, we have different phases. Often we break it up into 4 phases: picking up, pushing forward, putting the foot down on the ground and pressing the foot against the ground. So if we look into that one step, we see that first we're picking up the foot. Then when we reach the end point of the picking, then we push the foot forward. And when we're pushing the foot forward, the picking up has ended. When we finish pushing the foot forward, then we start to put the foot down. When we're putting the foot down, then the pushing has ended. It's impermanent. And then when we have put the foot down on the ground, then we shift our weight and the foot presses against the ground. And so at that point, the putting down has ended and is followed by the pressing of the foot. Then when we finish shifting the weight entirely, then we start with the next step, picking up, pushing forward, putting down, pressing down. So with these succession of stages in the one single step, we could see the mark of impermanence. So this is the impermanence discerned through the attention to the process of walking. And similarly with the breathing, when we're doing the breathing meditation, initially we're just, in order to focus and concentrate the mind, we're just attending to in and out, just observing each series as a whole. So we have in, breath, out breath. But we could start noticing or making the note that when the in-breath is occurring, there's no out-breath. When the in-breath has ended and the out-breath is occurring, then there's no in-breath. And then if we attend closely to the sequence of in-breath and out-breath, we could see that when the in-breath ends, there's a moment of pause before the out-breath starts. And when the out-breath ends, there's a moment of pause before the in-breath starts. And so here we have 4 stages in the in-breath and out-breath. And then if we attend to a single in-breath, say, we'll notice that in the in-breath, there's a beginning, starting to breathe in. Then there's the duration of the breath. Then there's the drawing to an end. And then the stopping of the in-breath. And similarly, with the out-breath, the same series. And so in this way, we could start to see the mark of impermanence in the succession of stages within a single in-breath and within a single out-breath. And then as the attention starts, the mindfulness and the attention and the comprehension becomes sharper and sharper, one is able to discern the arising and passing of material phenomena at ever subtle levels, until one starts to see, even in what seems to be the snap of a finger, the arising and passing away of many, many occasions of material phenomena. And then one could turn the attention from the aspect of material form and bring the mental aggregates, the mind process, into the focus of attention. So, for example, if we come back to the walking, one could see that as one is attending to picking, pushing, putting, and pressing, there is the act of observation. One observes the picking, one observes the pushing, one observes the putting down, one observes the pressing. And just as the picking, pushing, putting, and pressing, the physical acts come to an end, so the observation, which involves a feeling, a perception, an intention or volition, and the awareness or the consciousness, all of that is involved in the observation. That also arises and comes to an end. And so one starts to see the impermanence in the mental aggregates. And so in a sutta, also later in the Anguttara Nikaya, it's the this is called the Girimananda Sutta. It's Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Tens, Sutta number 60. Here the Buddha explains the contemplation or perception of impermanence. So he says, how does one practice the perception of impermanence? So he uses the example of a monk who's gone to the forest, the foot of a tree, or an empty hut, and then he reflects, form is impermanent, feeling is impermanent, perception is impermanent, volitional activities are impermanent, consciousness is impermanent. And so in this way, one dwells contemplating impermanence in the 5 aggregates. And so when one gains the insight into impermanence, the perception of impermanence, that corrects the distorted perception of permanence in the impermanent. So now one gains the correct understanding, the correct insight into the impermanence of all conditioned phenomena. Okay, the second inversion is the inversion of perception, mind, and view that takes what is really, here I use, the translation uses suffering, but I prefer to keep the Pali word dukkha. One takes it to be sukha, to be pleasurable, to be enjoyable. Okay, so we use I use the word suffering for dukkha, but as I've said, really dukkha has a much broader, deeper, more extensive meaning than suffering. Suffering is just the narrowest sense of dukkha, but the broader meaning is what is unsatisfactory, what is defective, what is inadequate or deficient. And so we could say that every aspect of our experience involves to some degree, a sense of dukkha. So even I'm sitting here speaking and I'm constantly changing my posture a little bit because there's always a little bit of discomfort in whatever posture I assume. And so if I were to hold one posture for an extended period of time, it would become torture. So if I am very comfortable sitting, leaning back in my chair, but if I were to be strapped into that position for hours, it would become torture. I get a very nice meal at lunchtime and I eat and enjoy it. But if I were to keep on eating the same food over and over and over, for hours, I brought the same delicious, let us say I enjoy, chocolate chip mint ice cream. And so somebody gives me a cup of chocolate chip ice cream and wow, I'm so excited, wonderful. And I eat it and I'm so enthralled with the pleasure. But then they give me a second cup of chocolate chip ice cream. And then again, I'm a little bit happy, not as happy as the first time. I start eating it and I enjoy it, but the pleasure is a little bit less. Then they give me a third cup of chocolate chip mint ice cream. And now I'm eating it, but forcing myself to eat it. Then they give me a fourth cup of chocolate chip mint ice cream. And I say, I'm sorry, I've had enough. I don't want to eat it. But they point a gun to my head and say, you eat that chocolate chip ice cream or we're going to shoot you right through the brain. Then I have to eat the chocolate chip ice cream with displeasure. Then they give me a fifth cup and a sixth cup, and it becomes utter torment to eat chocolate chip ice cream. And so that which was pleasurable becomes dukkha. And so we could see all the time in our experience, if we look very closely, we see that there's itching, aches and pains in the body, feelings of discontent in the mind, yearnings that we cannot satisfy, boredom with what we're accustomed to and familiar with. And even if we are in the midst of enjoyment and pleasure, if we look closely into that experience of enjoyment, we see that there's a subtle clinging to the experience. And that clinging is itself accompanied by a kind of maybe a subtle degree of anxiety, a wish to hold on to the enjoyable experience, and a fear of losing it. And that is the subtle aspects of dukkha. And that dukkha, actually the commentaries explain sometimes that dukkha is udayabhaya patipila tatta. I think it's pila, which means oppression by arising and vanishing. That is, we look into our experience, our moment-to-moment experience, and we see that the constituents of our experience, the body, the feeling, perception, the volitional activities, and even the consciousness are constantly arising and passing away. That is impermanence. But because they're impermanence, because they're arising and passing away beyond our control, there's a sense of being oppressed or pained, or even we could say injured or made uncomfortable by the arising and passing away. And that is the deeper meaning of dukkha. And so what we take to be enjoyable is our body or form, the feelings, especially the pleasant feelings, the pleasurable perceptions, the enjoyable activities, the consciousness of pleasant experiences. But in all of those pleasant experiences, there is the arising and vanishing, arising and passing. And when we look into that arising and vanishing, we get the sense of oppression, discomfort, being pained by the arising and passing away. Okay, so that is the mark of dukkha. Okay, then we have the inversion of taking what is not self to be self. Again, these distortions, these inversions of perception, mind, and view apply to the 5 aggregates. We could say that the 5 aggregates are the domain for the distorted perception, thinking, and view of a self. Okay, so anattani, so this means what is not the self. And here we have the mistake, the inversion of taking this to be atta, to be self. And so this idea of self gets ascribed, projected, projected, superimposed upon the 5 aggregates, either individually or collectively. And the idea of self, let us say first, what is meant by this idea of self? It doesn't mean that we don't exist as persons in the ordinary sense of the term, but the idea of self, I would say, is the idea of an essential basis or core of personal identity, some kind of stable basis of personal identity. And this idea of self arises when we draw upon the spontaneous notion of I and mine. So first there arise these ideas of I and mine. So these ideas, according to the Buddha's teaching, originate from ignorance, from not seeing things as they really are. So this is what is called in Pali, ahankara and mamankara, making an I, making mine. We construct these ideas sort of spontaneously of I and mine, and we interpret all of our experience through the lens of what am I and what is mine. And then through these spontaneous ideas of I and mine, we decide that there must be some underlying basis for these ideas, that behind these ideas of I and mine, there is some substantial, stable core of our personal identity. And this is what we say is the self. And when we look for some kind of content for that self, we always have to formulate this idea of self in relation to the 5 aggregates. So we say, what is the self? Either the self is material form, some take the body to be self, or the self owns material form. The self is sort of inside or in the background, and material form, the body, belongs to the self. Or else we say that the self exists in material form. The self is some kind of subtle spiritual entity which exists within the body. According to the old thinkers of the Upanishads, the self dwelt in the innermost chamber of the heart. And so the self was tiny, minuscule, just like a pearl or a little gem existing within the innermost core of the heart. Or else the self contains material form. That the self is vast, boundless, and universal, and it contains everything in the universe, including material form. And then the same, we have these 4 ways of conceiving the self. As material form, as the owner, as the inner core, and as the container. So these 4 modes apply to each of the aggregates: feeling, perception, the volitional activities, consciousness. And so in this way, we get 20 possible views concerning the self. These is called, and technically the technical term for this is Sakkaya Ditthi. So the views of self. And so what the Buddha teaches is that these 5 aggregates that we take to be the self or the possessions of the self are really not I and not mine. They are really, when seen with wisdom, they are not self. And the essential meaning of, or the essential meaning of non-self, the way it's explained in the commentaries, is that the 5 aggregates are asaraka, which means that they are without any core, without inner essence. And there's a sutta that occurs in the Anguttara Nikaya that illustrates this empty or essenceless nature of the 5 aggregates. It occurs in chapter 22, I think it's Sutta 95. The name of the sutta is Penupinda Sutta, the lump of foam. And on this occasion, the Buddha was dwelling near the bank of the river Ganges together with the monks. And as they were sitting there, a large mass of foam came down the river Ganges. And the Buddha pointed to that lump of foam, and he said, when you look at that lump of foam from a distance, how does it appear? And the monk said, it appears as solid as a rock. And then the Buddha says, if you look into that lump of foam with correct insight, with correct perception, you'll see that it's just a mass of foam. And if you go up to it and hit it with your hand, the lump of foam will collapse. It's really empty, without any substance. It's hollow. And then he said, in the same way, this material form is hollow and empty, without any essence or substance. In that way, material form is empty and hollow, not a self. Then feeling, the Buddha compares to a water bubble. When there's a pool of water and it's raining heavily, the drops of rain come and they hit the pool, and on the surface of the pool, a bubble arises and breaks up. And then another drop of water comes, hits the surface. Another bubble appears, breaks up, and is gone. And bubble after bubble appears, breaks up, and is gone. And the Buddha says that is just like feeling. Feelings arise moment after moment, a pleasant feeling, a neutral feeling, a pleasant feeling. Each feeling arises and breaks up and vanishes, just like the water bubbles. Then he compares perception is like a mirage. We see on the surface of a road, for example, we see a pool of water appears. Especially when we're driving down the road on a hot day on a flat surface, it looks like there's a pool of water ahead of us on the road. But when we come over that stretch of road, there's no pool of water. It's just an illusion. And so perception is constantly creating the illusion of solidity, the illusion of substance. But when we look into those appearances, they are just like mirages. And so perception is like a mirage, empty, hollow, deceptive. Then the Buddha takes the mental formations or volitional activities, and he compares this to the trunk of a banana tree. If you see the trunk of a banana tree, it looks like it's large and solid, and you might think that I can take this trunk of the banana tree and cut it down and use it to get some solid piece of wood to use for as lumber, as timber for some construction project. But when you take the trunk of the banana tree and you cut it, then you unroll one coil, and then you think, now I've come to the heartwood, but what lies behind underneath that coil is another coil. You remove that coil, and there's still another coil, and then another coil, another coil, another coil, until you come to the last coil, and you remove that, and what is left? Nothing. It's just empty space. So that is the nature of our volitions. The volitions are always creating these projects, making plans, giving rise to hopes and wishes. But when one looks into those wishes, hopes, plans, intentions, determinations, decisions, and penetrates them with insight, one sees that they are impermanent and therefore empty of any substance. They're not the self. Then the consciousness seems to be the most solid, the most basic, the most, I could say, persistent element of our experience. But when we look into consciousness, we see that one kind of consciousness arises through conditions, persists and performs its function, then it vanishes to be replaced by another act of consciousness. So there will be visual consciousness through the eye, and auditory consciousness through the ear, smelling consciousness, tasting consciousness, touching consciousness, then reflective or mental consciousness. So there's a constant succession of acts of consciousness, none of them stable and lasting. And the Buddha compares consciousness to a magician who might take maybe a few handfuls of grass, a few pebbles, puts them out on a table, then waves his cloth in front of the table and removes it, and there is a castle appears, or maybe a rabbit appears. So it's an illusion created through the skill of the magician. And so consciousness is constantly giving rise to appearances of things as being real, substantial, lasting, durable, meaningful. But when we look into these things, or when we look into consciousness itself, we see that it is just like a magician creating illusions. Okay, now I said that these first three inversions apply to all five aggregates, but the fourth aversion applies specifically to the body. It's the ascribing to the body the mark of being beautiful or attractive. The Pali term here is in what is not beautiful, taking it to be beautiful or attractive. And so this doesn't apply to all five aggregates in their totality, but it applies specifically to the body, and it is what serves as the basis or stimulus for the arising of sensual desire or sexual lust. So one looks at the body of another person, particularly the opposite sex, though also it could be somebody of the same sex. And because one looks at the body superficially, just grasping the surface appearance of the body, there arises sensual desire. And so the antidote to this is developing the perception of the body as being unattractive or unbeautiful. And the instructions for this are also found in that sutta that I mentioned earlier. This is the Girimananda Sutta. Here we have the instructions for developing the perception of the unbeautiful or the unattractive. So this is a little bit for those with strong You have to have a strong mind to practice this. So what is the perception of the unattractive? So he says, here, the monk or the practitioner examines this body, starting from the top of the head and going downward, or from the soles of the feet going upward, bounded by skin. One sees the body as full of various kinds of impure or unattractive substances. So one considers that in this body, we have hairs of the head, hairs of the body, the fingernails, teeth, skin, the muscles, the sinews, bones, bone marrow. There's kidneys, heart, liver, diaphragm, spleen, lungs, the intestines, large and small intestines, the mesentery, that's the tissue that binds the intestines in place, the stomach, the fecal matter. Then comes the liquid parts, the bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, the grease of the skin, saliva, snot, the oil of the joints, and urine. And so one goes through the body again and again by way of these 32 parts. The later texts add the brain. And as one penetrates the surface of the body and starts examining these unbeautiful, unattractive parts, you consider, do I want to embrace a heap of bones and a kidneys? If somebody gives me a pile of with kidneys, heart, liver, a brain, spleen, intestines, puts it in a bag and gives it to me, do you want to kiss it and embrace it? I say, no. Get it away from me. And so that is the way one examines the body to develop that insight or that perception of the unattractive nature of the body. Okay, so those are the 4 inversions, and then the opposite are the non-aversions. So we have perception, thinking, and view, the correct view, which sees the impermanent as being impermanent, which sees what is dukkha as being dukkha, which sees what is not the self as being not the self, and which sees what is not beautiful as being not beautiful. So that is the 4 non-aversions, or ways of correcting the inversions of perception, thought, and views. Okay, maybe at this point we'll take the questions. You can read the verses on your own. Let me go back so I could see who's raising the hands. I've lost. Okay, okay, we first take Young. Young, do you want to ask? I'm not hearing anything. Okay, we'll go to Ravisara.
Yes, Bhante, thank you. Bhante, when it comes to the 3 marks of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatma,
Yeah.
am I right in saying that anicca and dukkha apply to all conditioned phenomena,
Yeah.
but anatma applies to all Dhamma, like all phenomena, because Nibbana, like you can't say that a person attains Nibbana because That is also non-self, isn't it, Bhante? Am I right in saying that?
I've seen some people say, say that the mark of impermanence also applies to, that the mark of non-self also applies to Nibbana, but I haven't seen any suttas which say that one contemplates Nibbana as being non-self, which doesn't mean that one contemplates Nibbana as being self. It's just that within the way of teaching in the suttas, the three characteristics that to be applied to the things that one takes to be the self, and the things that one takes to be the self are the five aggregates. So whenever the suttas explain the contemplation of non-self, they always explain it in terms of the five aggregates, or the six sense bases, or the six elements. I haven't seen any sutta that explains that one contemplates Nibbana as being non-self. So it's a bit of a puzzle why these verses in the Dhammapada say all conditioned things are impermanent, all conditioned things are dukkha, and all dhammas are not self. Yeah, I don't have a definite answer to that, but there's no canonical text that says Nibbana is to be contemplated as anatta, as non-self. Yeah, that's all I could say about that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Vetri.
Thank you, Bhante. So this sutta refers to distortions of perception, thinking, or mind, and views. So the perception would fall under the aggregate of perception, and then thinking and views would fall under the aggregate of sankharas, or volitional formations. So we could understand, is it correct to say the immediate condition for the arising of these three be contact? Because contact is the condition for the arising of perception.
Yeah, you can say contact is certainly a condition for them, yeah.
Okay, thank you both.
Okay, then Marcel.
Thank you, Venerable. I want to clarify on the one passage that says perceiving what is dukkha as pleasurable. Just now you mentioned about the example of the ice cream.
Yeah.
So on the first ice cream, it seems to be pleasurable, but at the moment, is it at the moment that we taste the ice cream?
Yeah.
Is actually dukkha, or is it still pleasurable?
Actually,
because
okay, I see. That's a good point. Okay, let us say at the level of immediate experience or the level of feeling, certainly you could say that the ice cream or the taste of the ice cream is pleasurable, but but we would say that underlying that enjoyment of the ice cream, there is a subtle maybe clinging to the taste of the ice cream. And so because of that subtle clinging, one is setting oneself up for disappointment when the ice cream comes to an end. And even when one looks very deeply into the act of eating the enjoyable ice cream with a kind of dispassionate mind, one could see that there's this craving that arises for the taste, and then it compels one to take the ice cream, put the ice cream in the mouth, and then there's this process of letting the ice cream melt on the mouth and swallowing the ice cream. And so there are little moments of displeasure within the act of enjoying the delicious ice cream. And so that shows that it's really dukkha.
Okay.
Yeah.
No,
So
but I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
I understand there's also another sutta that says there's a gratification in experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The sutta says that it speaks about the five aggregates because it says the pleasure and joy that arise from them, that is the enjoyment in them, the fact that they are impermanent, dukkha, and subject to change, that is the danger or drawback in them.
Okay.
Okay, Vinu.
Yeah. Good morning, Bhante. I have questions about this. The seed in, say, in our consciousness, bija. Say it coming from the previous life, and when take for example, when you look at somebody or a particular instances, you simply don't like it, and there are no reason for it, and only when you contemplate during meditation or in quiet settings, then you realize that probably is nothing to do with mentally programmed this life, and probably because of past life.
Yeah.
So under this instance, in terms of the defilement, how can one be less judgmental in this life? Could you give some guidance? Thank you.
I think it's a good question, but I think it's not so directly related to the sutta. So I think I want to ask to take the questions based on the sutta rather than questions that just come into your mind.
All right. Okay. No worries there. Thank you.
Maybe save it some other occasion. We'll come to a sutta which bears more directly on that question.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. HDM.
Yeah. Hi, Bhante. Thank you for the teaching. So we learned that to distinguish between, or to penetrate what appears as beauty as really unattractive. Does that hold across the board? Does the Buddha have a teaching on beauty that is, as it were, solid and reliable, or is all beauty ultimately unreliable?
No, I think this is not intended to be a complete aesthetic philosophy of beauty, but it's applied specifically to the perception of the body as being beautiful, not because the body is really ugly or disagreeable, but because that perception of beauty is the trigger for arousing sexual desire or sensual lust. And so part of the program of the Buddhist path for overcoming sensual craving one of the methods for overcoming the sensual craving is to transform that spontaneous perception of the body as being beautiful, to transform it into a perception of the unattractive nature of the body. And in that way, the sensual craving loses the stimulus that triggers it and sustains it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so in this way, I say that the first three characteristics mentioned here, impermanence, dukkha, anatta, apply to all conditioned things, and they are said to be aspects of seeing things yatha bhutang, seeing things as they really are. Whereas I would say that the perception of the unattractive nature of the body is more of an expedient means for dealing with the problem of sexual desire or sensual craving. And when looked at ultimately, the body is not attractive and not unattractive, because the body, when you look at it from the standpoint of insight, it's just a combination of elements or factors that are arising and passing away. So it's not beautiful, not non-beautiful, but as a skillful means to overcome the distorted way of thinking of the body as beautiful that gives rise to sensual desire, one focuses on the unattractive nature of the body.
Very well, thank you.
Okay, did I get Jia Tang?
Thank you, Bhante. I just want to ask the footnote you highlighted a corresponding Chinese sutra. It's SA 1069 something.
Yeah.
Would you mind? It's on page 72 out of 288. Can you tell me the corresponding either in Chinese or English wording? It's highlighted says SA, a yellow highlighted, you talked about before. It's under the inversion. Yeah, this is the highlighted part I'm interested in.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Okay.
You want me to come back up with the wording of that sutta?
Yeah, no, I want to know what SA means.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. Oh, this is it's the Sangyukta Agama.
Okay.
It's the counterpart to the Pali Sangyutta Nikaya.
All right. Thank you. And the other one is Patis 282.
Yeah, that's not Chinese. That's Pali. It's a work called the Patisambhidhamagga.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, Namal.
Good morning, Bhante.
Good morning.
I have a question, and I think your ice cream analogy resonated with a lot of us. And I find this conflict, whether it's ice cream or watching a TV show, that I've really looked forward to, is that do I engage in, knowing that it is ultimately going to be suffering, do I still engage in it with insight, or now that I know it, do I not? I find this conflict coming up, especially when the mindfulness practice in meditation kind of flows over into my daily life activities. Yeah. I'm constantly conflicted. Should I eat the ice cream? Should I not eat the ice cream, as it were?
Well, I have to confess, I eat ice cream from time to time too. I don't think that one has to sort of subject oneself to a process of extreme, excuse me, extreme ascetic self-denial at the very beginning. You could allow yourself to enjoy certain things, but just bear in mind that these things are not going to give us ultimate satisfaction. And so you could approach them in that way. So if you want, you can enjoy them, but try to do so without clinging to them. But of course, if you really want to strengthen the will and determination, then one starts to increase the domain of renunciation. And so one might start renouncing, at least for periods of time, things that one ordinarily enjoys. This is a practice among Roman Catholics during the period of Lent. It's the period from sometime in February till Easter, where they'll choose something that they regularly enjoy, and then they determine that during the period of Lent, I will give this up. So you could do that, but I don't want to sort of say that you should start denying yourself all the little pleasures of life. Then your Buddhist life becomes a kind of self-affliction rather than an enjoyable path.
I see. Thank you so much, Bhante.
Okay, we take one more question and then we'll have to stop. This is Priya. Priya? I'm not getting any sound. Okay, I didn't get any sound from Priya. So Marcel, you had some question you want to take Priya's place?
Hi, thank you, Venerable. So just a follow-up question on the ice cream. So if one reaches an arahant level,
yeah,
do they still enjoy worldly things like ice cream? How is the experience like for arahant?
Well, I can't say what it's like for it, but there's a statement someplace that the Buddha experienced, this is describing the Buddha, it says that he experiences the enjoyable taste of the food he eats without having attachment to that taste. So I guess that would apply to ice cream too. Okay, so we're going to have to end for the morning, the session for the morning. So I want to end, before we do the sharing of the merits, to end with some announcements. Okay, today is Saturday, so Sunday, tomorrow evening, there's the group meditation with Bhante Mangala. That is from 7 to 8 p.m. On Wednesday evening, I have lead the group meditation again from 7 to 8 p.m. This is on Eastern Daylight Time. Then on Thursday evening, two of my students, Stephen Sass and Regina Valdez, they conduct a sutta discussion group over the internet. It's called Suttas and the City. If you search online for that on Google, if you search for that group, it will take you to the group and you could join over Zoom to participate. Every week they take a different sutta for discussion, the explanation and discussion. And that is on Thursday from, I think, from 7 to 7:45 p.m. Okay.
Sutta and the City?
Suttas, I think it's a plural, suttas and the city, because they originally were giving it live in New York City.
Thank you, Bhante. It's Sutta and the City.
Sutta and the City. Okay.
Thank you very much.
There it is.
Sutta what? Sutta and.
We were spelling it wrong.
Sutta and.
S-U-T-T-A.
S-U-T-T.
Look.
Where?
Sutta and the City.
That's what they're gonna study now.
No? It says if you want to join, and you join. You have to request to join.
New York.
No, it's not. It's online.
Meeting up here.
You have to join.
Yeah, it takes place over the internet. Maybe Stephen could say some words about it.
It's on the internet. Our website is Sutta and the City. So SUTTAANDTHECITY. Suttaandthecity.com. Thank you very much.
Bhante, I'd also like to say that Stephen's class is also on Sundays.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have mentioned it's twice a week. So it's Thursday evening and Sunday evening from 7 to 7:45 p.m. Okay, so let us now do the sharing of the merits. I'm going to have to mute. Okay, we're going to share the merits from our meditation, discussion, and question period. Share the merits with the Devas, the Dhamma protecting deities, the Nagas or dragon spirits, the Butas, and other beings. So on your own, you can recite along with me. Akasa ta Shaboom ta deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasana. Akasa ta Shaboom ta deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasa ta Shaboom ta deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya sabbe sata anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya Bhavagopadaya vici hetato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibuting. Okay, now you can all say sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu,
Sadhu Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you very much,
Okay,
Bante.
okay,
Enjoy the night.
okay.
Good week, everybody.
Okay, so thank you all for
Good week,
joining.
Bante.
Bante.
Thank you, Bante. Thank you very much. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Bante.
Okay, okay, so
Be
see you next
healthy.
week.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Okay.